Grace to you and peace from God's beloved. Please be seated. One of the things I have in my house is the TV's always on because the silence gets me a little crazy. So I keep the TV on, and it's usually just one of the cable news stations. A little bit of background noise when I'm going about doing my thing. But over the last few weeks, it's been quite something on the news, hasn't it? I've been watching the endless loops of Hurricane Irma beat down on the Florida Keys as it makes its way towards inland. And as of this morning, it's reported that 1.3 million people are without power in the Florida Keys. And before Irma, there was Harvey in Texas, wreaking havoc on millions of people's lives and property. And some are saying that the cleanup and restoration efforts in that city will not take months, but years. And while our eyes were on the destruction in the United States, there's flooding in Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Myanmar, and have displaced 40 million people and have killed over 1,300 people, 40% of whom are reportedly children. Then I turned the channel, and it looks like North Korea has successfully tested a hydrogen bomb. And the experts are worried that it will soon be able to make it deliverable, which means that they could attach it to a warhead and launch it, dropping a bomb on Seoul or Tokyo or even the continental United States. And I have to admit, when I was driving home from the grocery store Friday afternoon, I was listening to some CBC comedy show. The program dropped in mid-joke, and the emergency signal came on, that, and it went on. It gets your attention. And my first thought was, okay, Kim Jong-un just launched a missile at the United States, miscalculated the trajectory, and was going to land in the golf course behind my apartment. I better call my kids while I can. But thankfully, if I can say that, it wasn't a warning of a nuclear attack. It was only the evacuation order at Waterton due to the wildfires getting out of control. And that's also been an issue this summer, hasn't it, hey? Wildfires. They've been burning in BC, as we all know, since we've been breathing in that smoke for months. And the fires are now at our doorstep. I was in Lethbridge yesterday, and the smoke is much worse down there. My youngest daughter had to keep her puffer with her as we went about the city because the smoke was messing with her asthmatic lungs. Alberta and BC aren't alone in fighting these fires. Wildfires have also been destroying forests and property in California, Montana, Oregon, Siberia, and Portugal. And then there's the droughts to make things worse. Montana and North Dakota have not seen a decent rain for months. Southern BC is praying for rain. Vernon has level 3 water restrictions, and we are here in Calgary haven't seen a decent downpour in weeks. So between horrifically destructive hurricanes, floodings, that's destroying lives and decimating entire communities, a nuclear threat from an unstable, unpredictable, and downright crazy regime, wildfires that are burning out of control, eating up swaths of the natural landscape, and thousands of people dying due to climate catastrophes beyond their immediate control, we come to church to pray, to hear a word from the Lord born from sacred scripture, and to listen to a message of hope distilled from ancient wisdom. And today we hear, it's a bright, sunshiny day. Perhaps not the best song to hear in the middle of a drought. And such a sentiment may seem to lack the gravity to respond to the weight of world events that have filled our collective cultural consciousness. But I'm glad we're starting this series with Jesus Radio Superstar Volume 2 with this song, even though I was a little angry at Dave Perks this past week while I was trying to figure out what to say about this. Because I think this song can and does speak to our current situation. Perhaps not as directly as, Bach's B minor Mass, but still, we can dig into this message. It becomes a song not of blind optimism or vacuous happiness, but of real life hope. But I recognize that this message isn't readily apparent. Because if there's a happier song written, I don't know what it is. I was familiar with this song, and I knew it had kind of a positive vibe to it, but when I sat down and read the lyrics to prepare this sermon, I must confess that I laughed out loud because it seemed over the top happy. Because it's not that I'm like a morose kind of guy, but I'm not always happy either. I do lean towards the depressive side, and there are moments when I hum a happy tune, but only like maybe the song Happy by Pharrell Williams, which kind of wears on you a little bit, and it wears its happiness on its sleeve. This song, Bright Shiny Day, seems to keep a happiness groove that will not let go. So when I first sat down with this song, I thought to myself, man, I'm just not there. This isn't a song I could write. Maybe it's because with all the nastiness and negativity in the world, all that's happening around the globe and within our own community, I just couldn't sit down and write a song or a sermon about clear skies and rainbows. But Jimmy Cliff is apparently that guy, because here we are. And maybe that's a good thing. It's a refreshing change to all the negativity that's constantly pounding on us. It could be that we need to change our orientation and look to the good things that are happening all around us, rather than dwell in all the cynicism and pessimism, the tragedies and traumas that so often take over our minds and take up residence within us. But what I found I liked about this song, after I listened to it a few times, is that it's not just a happy song for happiness' sake. It's not a song of empty good feelings. It's actually a lot more than that. It's a song of overcoming. It's a song of victory. I can see clearly now the rain is gone, because the rain was once there and I was caught in it. I can see all obstacles in my way, so now I can overcome those obstacles. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind, so my clouded vision is now clear, and I can see possibilities that I couldn't see before. It's going to be a bright, sunshiny day. So Jimmy Cliff is recognizing that life does have obstacles. Rain does appear in your life. There are moments when we are blind to a beautiful vision for our lives, a blindness caused by the dark clouds of discouragement that do cloud our vision. And he offers a hopeful and optimistic attitude. And as I was reading the words to this song, Isaiah chapter 9 jumped into my head. It says, "But there will be no gloom for those who were in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time he will make glorious the way of the sea and the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations." And here's the familiar part of the passage. "The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppression, you have broken, as on the day of Midian. For all the boots of the trampling warriors and all the garments rolled in blood shall be burned as fuel for the fire." The people of God to whom Isaiah was preaching knew what darkness was. They knew what it was like to look at the sky and only see dark clouds. They knew what it was like to look into the future and see nothing. Assyria was expanding its borders. They had already destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel, and it looked like the southern kingdom of Judah was going to be swallowed up as well. Their way of life was threatened, and all they knew was defeat after defeat after defeat. And they believed it was God's judgment on them for mixing pagan rituals into the worship of the God of their ancestors. They believed that God was punishing them for defiling ancient traditions and for defying divine commands. And so they cried out to God for deliverance from the Assyrians. They prayed over and over and over again until they received an answer. And they received an answer by way of a king. The answer they received was the emergence of King Hezekiah, who restored worship back to its purity and helped the Assyrians from completely taking them over. As a nation, they were rebuilding. As a people, they were reborn. And that's why Isaiah proclaimed with great enthusiasm, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. Finally, they've been lifted out of the Assyrian darkness, the darkness that kept them in captivity, the darkness that led to their national shame. God's light of freedom was now shining on them. God's renewal, on them the light has shined. And then it got better. God wasn't done yet. You have multiplied the nations, O God, because the people were shrinking in numbers and were in danger of being totally annihilated. You have increased its joy, because they had gone far too long without seeing any joy, only shame and misery. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, because finally they will be fed and have the food security that they've longed for, because they've gone hungry for far too long. And as a people exult in dividing plunder, the plunder of the victors, because finally they will see the victory in their lives and in their nations. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of the oppressor that is Assyria, you have broken, as on the day of Midian. Remember that time when God rescued God's people from the Midianites with only a handful of soldiers, defeating an entire army. For all the boots of the trampling warriors and all the garments rolled in blood shall be burned as fuel for the fire, and the instruments of cruelty will be destroyed. The reminders of their captivity will be turned to ashes, and never to rise again. And as a people, their national humiliation is finally over. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. They can see clearly now. The reign of their captivity is over. And they can be their own free people once again. With God's power, they have overcome the obstacles in their way. Gone are the clouds that had them blind to God's vision for their lives. For them as a people, it was indeed a bright, sunshiny day. I see that for us as well. I see that for you. Every time I turn on the TV and see catastrophe after catastrophe, even when I look out my window and see the grass yellow and harden, even when the radio issues evacuation orders, even when moronic, loudmouth preachers blame hurricanes and human misery on whatever sin they personally object to, even when the doctor gives some bad news, even when I hear stories in your lives of unexpected and unwanted turns, changes that are beyond your control and wreak havoc on the life you worked so hard to create and to maintain. Even when we all have those moments of darkness, those moments when life feels so heavy that the fight to keep going seems beyond our strength. Even with everything happening in the world that is pointing to global self-destruction, I remember that story, and I remember that there is still good in the world. I remember neighbor helping neighbor. I remember people who still step up to serve at great cost to themselves. I remember that most people have hearts filled with compassion and care and want to help those in need. I remember that people can and people do risk greatly out of kindness to help out strangers. Because in a culture that often says me first, I have seen that me turn to we when faced with tragedy, and whole communities come together to meet whatever challenge that they're facing. And I remember that God can take any defeat and turn it into a victory, because I believe in a God who raised Jesus from the dead. I believe in a God who rescued Israel from Assyria. I believe in a God who creates life and calls that life good. That's why I can see clearly now. The rain is gone. Because God has opened my eyes to see not just the pain and tragedy of this world, but also to fix my gaze on those who serve and care. I can see all obstacles in my way, obstacles that with God's help I can overcome. Here's the rainbow that I've been praying for. A rainbow reminded me, just like Noah, that God is committed to life in this world and not to death. It's going to be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. And even if that day is not today, then it will be tomorrow. Because the people who walked in darkness have seen God's light of victory. That includes you. That includes us. That includes the world that Jesus came to save. And may today be the beginning of our sunshiny day. Amen.